So, hi, I'm Raymond Woodley. This is Sarah Eisenhart, Megan Perkins, and Sean Sullivan. No particular order. So, to start this out, we're going to do a little demonstration. So, Megan, would you please come up here?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Megan, your task is very simple. Catch this pen.
Alrighty.
All right. See, not that hard. All right, Megan, close your eyes.
Alrighty.
Hold out your hands. You're ready to catch this pen. Ready? What are you doing?
I don't know when you're throwing it at
I'm
me.
not gonna throw it that hard at you. Come on, just hold out your hands. Okay, good. So, as you can see, when you're lacking one of your main senses, we struggle to interact with the world. One of our best known examples of this is Helen Keller, who was blind as Megan was pretending to be, and also deaf. So over the past couple of weeks, we've relentlessly researched Helen Keller's life, and we'd now like to share with you some information about her early life, her activism, her occasional controversy, and her legacy today. So for more about her early life, let's go ahead and throw the pen back to Megan.
Thank you, Raymond. Yep, as you said, I'm Megan Perkins, and I'll be talking about Helen Keller's early life. Now, you should note, You should note that Helen Keller wasn't always deaf and blind. The biography published in 1999, titled Helen Keller, A Life, by Dorothy Herman reads, Helen Adams Keller was born a normal, hearing-sighted infant on June 27, 1880 in Tuscumbia, a small rural town in northwestern Alabama, end quote. It continues by describing how the first 2 years of her life were ordinary, and she developed as such. At 6 months, she could say howdy and TTT, and she knew the meaning of the word water, end quote, which becomes very poignant later. Helen Keller herself actually wrote an autobiography titled The Story of My Life, which was published in 1903. This book was restored in 2018 and explains the following. Helen Keller suffered from, begin quote, a mysterious illness that left her completely deaf and blind. Cut off from communication with her family and the outside world, she was wild and unmanageable, end quote. She was so violent in her frustration that her family seriously considered confining her to a mental home. However, under inspiration of Charles Dickens, who had covered the story, a famous author, who had covered the story of Laura Bridgman, a blind deaf girl who had been educated despite the challenges that come with that, Keller's mother hired Annie Sullivan as a last-ditch effort to help and teach her daughter. I will note, however, that Keller wasn't completely cut off from communicating. She remarks that, I felt the need of some communication with others and began to make crude signs. A shake of the head meant no, and a nod yes. A pull meant come, and a push go. Let's say she wanted a piece of bread. She would mime cutting and buttering those slices. Or if she wanted ice cream for dinner, she would mime working the fridge and shivering to indicate the cold. Moving on, Annie Sullivan was the well-known miracle worker that was able to teach Keller language. An article published in 2008 titled Learning from Helen Keller by Miriam T. Black was written with the purpose of analyzing the techniques that Sullivan employed to teach the blind deaf girl. It reads that luckily for Keller, Sullivan did not have any clear idea of how to teach her and did not feel obligated to follow any particular methodology, end quote. Because of this, Sullivan was extremely attentive and receptive to Keller's interest and responses to things, and proceeded as such. She always had a very clear idea of Keller's understanding. She would sign words and phrases into Keller's hand with the object or action in the context of life that Keller was experiencing those things, much as we do when we speak to an infant. For example, she might hand her a doll in the one hand and sign the word doll in the other, or she would sign the word cake before offering her a slice. This approach to teaching Keller led to the famous language breakthrough that occurred at the Pump House on April 5, 1887, almost 1 month after Sullivan had arrived. While cold water was running over the one hand and her teacher was spelling W-A-T-E-R in the other, Keller realized that the one meant the other, and all other things, actions, and emotions could also be represented by these finger movements. End quote. Following this breakthrough, Keller rapidly acquired language and knowledge, setting her up for an incredible future. Next, we're going to spell out that incredible future of activism and controversy, but first, can I get a volunteer? Thank you. So, I'm going to ask you to hold out both your hands. Here, you stand, yeah, that's perfect. Okay. And close your eyes. In one hand, I will place an object, and in the other, I will spell out the word, and you'll have to tell me what it is.
Okay.
Do you know what I spelled?
No.
Do you have a guess?
Can you do it one more time?
Absolutely. Also, you don't have to know.
No idea.
Yeah. Well, you can open your eyes. I spelled out the word toad.
Oh.
And the purpose of that demonstration was just to illustrate how remarkable it was that she came to the conclusions that she did. Yeah. So next up, we'll have Raymond transition.
So as we can see, she was able to learn because of Annie Sullivan's incredible work. So now the question is, what did she do with what she learned? So for her activism and for her occasionally controversial stances, let's go to Sean.
Thank you, Raymond. Helen Keller's life was one of activism and controversy. She was associated with influential figures of her time, such as President Eisenhower, as you can see here. Love that photo. Keller was an outspoken activist. Here, you can see her participating in an actors' strike in the year 1919. Keller's activism was varied and diverse. One particular writer, named Quick, made note of Keller's activism. In 1988, Quick stated in an article that he wrote entitled "Speaking Out: Political Career of Helen Keller," that, and I quote, by 1912, she, Helen Keller, was suggesting to young women, college girls, who were writing to her asking how they could be involved, that the best way for them to help the blind was to read industrial economics. Keller wanted young women to broaden their social, political, and literary understanding. Quick also remarked in the same article that, and I quote, in 1915, she, Helen Keller, spoke at a labor forum in New York and advocated a general strike against the war. Keller had socialist views, beliefs, and was adamant on her anti-war stance. Many of Keller's beliefs were controversial. The controversy was due to her position in society and the individuals she advocated for. Ramft and Tabor are two writers who detailed Keller's controversial life. In 2018, Ramft wrote an article entitled "Eugenics and an Overlooked Rebuttal," in which she said, and I quote, Helen Keller hypocritically argued that a human life is only sacred when it can provide some use to itself and to society, conveniently forgetting that not every disabled child has an Annie Sullivan as a teacher. Annie Sullivan was Helen Keller's tutor, teacher, and confidant for the majority of her life. And as Tabor elaborated in his 2023 book review, Helen Keller, Christian Socialist, for decades she, Helen Keller, had extolled Vladimir Lenin as one of the leading figures of her time. Lenin being the founder of the Russian Communist Party, you can see how that would be problematic in the United States. And finally, we will learn about Keller's activism and how it cemented her legacy. Things have changed for deafblind individuals since Keller's time. And now we will, and an example will now be given by Raymond.
So what we demonstrated earlier was a technique called tracing, where you trace the English letters onto the hand to communicate. And that's not the only one. So another technique that Helen Keller would have used in her life was a technique called tactile. So that's what we're going to demonstrate now. Sarah, if you would close your eyes, hold out your hands, and I'm going to fingerspell a word for you in the sign alphabet. So, hang on. Okay. What was that word?
Dog.
No. So it's a little hard if you don't know sign, but the word I spelled was Keller for Keller. So again, that's one of the techniques that she would have used to communicate with her peers. So as a proud activist, well, some of her opinions, you can sit down now, Sarah, thank you very much. While some of her opinions were controversial, her whole life makes her a figure worth remembering. So actually, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind coming back up here and telling us a little more about her legacy.
Thank you, Raymond. Helen Keller left a lasting legacy that will guide and inspire many for years to come. Her activism was greatly involved in helping the deafblind like herself, and she was integral in starting 2 different organizations that are still around today dedicated to doing just that. The first is the aptly named Helen Keller International, founded in 1915 by Keller and her friend George Kessler. According to their website, which was accessed last Saturday, their mission is to ensure that every person is given the opportunity to reach their potential, just like Keller did, despite certain circumstances. They accomplish this by providing vitamin A supplements, eye health services, and proper nutrition to children around the world. Most recently, the nonprofit helped to eliminate trachoma as a public health crisis in Mali. The second organization that Keller worked with was the American Foundation for the Blind, which according to their website was founded in 1921 by M.C. Michael and collaborated with Keller in 1924. They promote accessibility and advocacy for the blind, and they even have their own peer-reviewed journal entitled Journal of Visual Impairment and Blindness. One article in their November 2023 issue, written by Rhett McBride and Tina Herzberg, explored the innovative resources that could help vision impaired students in the STEM field. In looking at her physical impairments, there have been major changes in the different support systems available to deafblind individuals today, because as Sean mentioned earlier, not everyone is lucky enough to have Annie Sullivan as a teacher. The first major change comes with the American Disabilities Act. Passed in 1990, their website describes the law as, quote, guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to enjoy employment opportunities, purchase goods and services, and have access to local and state government programs. This would have made a huge difference in Keller's life because she would have been able to get into vastly more colleges and have accommodations made for her specific needs, as well as more opportunities for jobs should she have chosen to go into the workforce. The other major change since Keller's passing has been the ways in which the deafblind communicate with the world and with each other. According to the website for the Perkins School of the Blind, the new language of pro-tactile ASL is, quote, a cutting-edge linguistic movement that allows for deafblind people to communicate with each other. A video on pro-tactile ASL will be demonstrated here, I think, if it wants to go.
It obviously does not want to go. Oh, enable content, there we go.
Oscar Serna is speaking in a brand new language. Oscar is both deaf and blind, or deafblind. He works at Gallaudet University on a project tracking the evolution of a language for those who can't see or hear. This new language is called Protactile ASL. The ASL stands for American Sign Language, which uses visual signs for words and phrases. Protactile ASL communicates entirely through touch. For example, here's a sentence in ASL. Here's how Oscar would say the same sentence in Protactile ASL. Historically, deafblind people communicated through American Sign Language, Braille, and fingerspelling, where each letter of each word is signed into a person's hand. Helen Keller, maybe the world's most famous deafblind person, used fingerspelling. But those are limiting, especially when deafblind people want to talk to each other. Protactile ASL emerged in the early 2000s as once isolated deafblind people began to form communities. Deafblind people have been adopting American Sign Language and adding gestures for things many languages don't have words for. For example, this tap on the hand is like nodding. The language has been evolving ever since.
Now, what's new in Protactile is that we're seeing things that were used in visual sign language be transitioned from the use of space to the use of the perceiver's body.
Traditional theories of language defined it as something seen or heard, but Protactile ASL proves that language can also be communicated through touch. And for the people speaking it, it allows for a life with richer communication.
Since I became Protactile, all of the channels have opened up. Information flows freely. It's like going from dial-up to broadband.
The invention of protactile ASL would have made a huge difference in how Keller learned and developed and was able to communicate with people during her time as an activist, because it would have been so much easier for her to communicate with deafblind people like herself. And now to wrap up, we have Raymond.
Alright, so to review, despite a severe illness in her early life, Helen Keller went on to be an accomplished activist despite her disabilities and her sometimes controversial positions. The demonstrations we gave really hardly scratched the surface of what she had to overcome, but we can take inspiration from her remarkable life and the perseverance and intelligence she embodied despite her circumstances. Thank you. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes. Why did she support the individuals that she did?
That is an outstanding question, Tricia. So, Helen Keller was interesting in that throughout her life, she utilized information that she wanted to, and then discarded other information. So for instance, she read the Bible and was like, I like this, don't like any of this. And so that perspective allowed her to gravitate towards individuals that she was interested in, and kind of ignore other aspects of their existence. Also, when Keller was a young woman, she realized that most of the disabled people in society were disabled because of accidents or issues with work. So they had been injured on the job. The industrial practices during that time were horrendous. So and when these people became disabled, they were essentially cast out, right? They were cast down, they weren't considered to be worthy. And so Keller looked to individuals like Lenin with their socialist beliefs, excuse me, and she really gravitated towards that, right? The idea of having people be represented, especially workers. So that influenced quite a bit of her decisions throughout her life and her beliefs. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? All right.
Are we good, guys?